I've worked a lot of night jobs in my life. Warehouses, half-finished apartment buildings, empty office parks, foreclosed houses where people had already broken in and stripped out the copper pipes. I've done the kind of jobs where you sit in your truck for 8 hours with gas station coffee, hoping nothing happens, but also knowing that if something does happen, nobody is getting there fast. So I'm not the kind of guy who freaks out over a creaky floorboard or a weird noise in an old house. At least, I didn't think I was. But what happened at the Blackwood estate still bothers me years later, mostly because it never gave me a clean answer. If it had been some drunk guy, or a homeless person, or even a couple of dumb teenagers messing around, I think I could have moved on from it. But the more I think about it, the less sense it makes. My name is Mike. I'm from just outside Chicago, Illinois, and for a few years I worked as a caretaker and night security guy for vacant properties around the suburbs. Nothing fancy. Most of the time, my job was simple. Check doors, check windows, make sure nobody was breaking in, walk the perimeter every couple of hours, call the cops if something looked off. One Thursday afternoon in November, I got a call from a property manager I had worked with before. His name was Carl. He handled expensive homes and private estates around Lake Forest and Highland Park. Rich people houses. The kind of places where the driveway is longer than most streets. Carl told me he needed someone for a one-night security detail. He said the property was called the Blackwood Estate. I'd heard the name before, but only in that local rumor kind of way. Everybody in the area knew about it. It was this huge old mansion buried back in the woods, built sometime in the late 1800s. The Blackwood family had money from railroads or shipping or something like that. Nobody had lived there full-time in decades. Carl told me contractors were coming in the next morning to start inspection work, and the owners wanted someone watching the place overnight because urban explorers had been trying to get inside. That part made sense. Old mansion, creepy history, hidden in the woods. Of course people wanted to sneak in and record videos. Then, Carl told me the pay. $400. For one night. I actually laughed and said, "Dude, what's wrong with it?" He said, "Nothing's wrong with it. It's just remote, and the owners don't want any issues before the inspection." I should have asked more questions. I know that now. But at the time, my truck needed repairs, my rent was coming up, and $400 for one night sounded pretty damn good. So I said yes. Carl emailed me the instructions. There was a gate code, a lockbox code for the keys, a list of doors and windows I needed to check, and a note that said the power was limited. A few emergency lights were running on a backup system, but most of the house would be dark. At the bottom of the email, there was one sentence that stood out. "Do not enter the basement unless absolutely necessary." No reason, no explanation, just that. I got to the estate a little before 10 p.m. It had been raining all night, not hard, but steady. That cold Illinois rain that makes everything feel miserable and gray. The kind that soaks into your jacket before you even realize it. The entrance to the property was a tall black iron gate between two stone pillars. One of the pillars had an old metal plaque bolted onto it that said Blackwood. I punched in the code, and the gate opened slowly, making this ugly grinding sound like it hadn't moved in months. The driveway was long and narrow, with trees pressing in from both sides. My headlights barely cut through the rain. Every now and then, I'd see a stone statue or an old garden wall flash by in the dark, and every single time my brain tried to turn it into a person. Then the mansion came into view. I actually slowed down when I saw it. It was massive. 3 stories, dark brick, tall windows, white columns out front, and a roofline full of chimneys and sharp angles. The place looked less like a house and more like something that had been left behind by another century. There were no lights on inside, except a weak yellow glow near the front entry. I parked in the circular driveway, killed the engine, and just sat there for a second. I remember thinking, man, 400 better be worth this. The rain tapped on the windshield. The trees moved around in the wind. The house sat there completely still, like it was waiting for me to stop being a coward and go inside. I grabbed my flashlight, my thermos, my phone charger, and the key ring from the lockbox. The front door was heavy, old wood with a brass handle that felt freezing cold. When I opened it, the smell hit me right away. Dust, damp wood, old carpet, and something else. Not dead animal, not mold exactly. Just this stale, sour smell, like the house had been closed up so long the air had gone bad. The foyer was huge. Marble floor, grand staircase, covered furniture, and portraits on the walls. Most of them had sheets over them, which somehow made them worse. It felt like the house was full of people standing under blankets. There was a security binder on a table near the front door, just like Carl said. Inside was a checklist. Front entrance. Rear patio door. Library windows. Dining room windows. Kitchen entrance. East wing windows. West wing windows. Second floor balcony doors. Basement door. Next to basement door, someone had written by hand, "Keep locked." That was the first thing that made me feel uneasy. Printed instructions are normal. Handwritten warnings feel personal. I decided to check that door right away. The basement door was down a narrow hallway past the kitchen. It was an old white wooden door with a deadbolt and a separate key lock. The paint was cracked, and the bottom of it had water damage, like the basement had flooded at some point. I tried the handle. Locked. I pushed on it with my shoulder. Didn't move. I checked the deadbolt. Locked too. I marked it on the checklist and told myself that was that. For the first hour, nothing happened. I walked the first floor, checked windows, checked doors, and tried not to let the house get in my head. The place was creepy, no doubt, but it was the normal kind of creepy. Old furniture, long hallways, dusty mirrors, floorboards that complained every time you stepped on them. At around midnight, I did my first outside perimeter check. The rain had picked up a little. I walked along the side of the mansion with my flashlight pointed at the windows. Most of them were locked from the inside. A few had boards across them. The backyard opened into what used to be a garden, but it was completely overgrown now. There was an old stone fountain back there, cracked and full of dirty rainwater. Beyond that was a line of trees that went down a slope toward the woods. That's where I saw the first thing that didn't sit right with me. My flashlight caught something pale between 2 trees. It was only there for a second. A face? Maybe. Or a piece of trash caught on a branch. I stopped walking and aimed the light directly at it. Nothing. I stood there listening. Rain, wind, trees, then I heard a branch snap somewhere deeper in the woods. I called out, "Hey." Private property. No answer. I said it again, louder, still nothing. I told myself it was probably a deer. Lake Forest is full of deer. They'll stand there and stare at you like they're judging your whole life. But I walked back inside faster than I walked out. By 12:45, I had settled in the kitchen. It was the least creepy room in the house, mostly because one of the emergency lights actually worked in there. I sat at a small wooden table with the binder open, drinking coffee from my thermos and checking my phone. No service. Not great, but not shocking. The property was buried in trees, and the house had thick brick walls. Carl had warned me the signal would be spotty. At 1:13 a.m., I heard a thud from upstairs. Not a little creak. A real thud. Like something heavy dropped onto the floor. I froze with my hand around the thermos. For a few seconds, I just listened. Nothing else. I wanted badly to ignore it, but that was literally what I was being paid not to do. So I grabbed my flashlight and went upstairs. The second floor was colder than the first. Not just a little colder. It felt like walking into a meat locker. The hallway stretched both ways from the top of the stairs, with bedrooms and sitting rooms on either side. I swept my flashlight over the floor. Dust everywhere. That was actually helpful, because if someone had been walking around up there, I'd probably see footprints. At first I didn't. Then I reached a sitting area at the end of the east hallway. There was an old couch under a sheet, a small round table, and a bookshelf with glass doors. One of the glass doors was open. On the floor in front of it was a book. A big brown book with no title on the cover. I stared at it for a long second. That could have been the sound. Maybe the shelf shifted. Maybe the door wasn't latched. Maybe the old wood moved because of the temperature change. That explanation worked for about 5 seconds. Then I noticed the dust around the book. There was a mark in it. A shoe print. Not mine. I was wearing work sneakers with a flat tread. This print had a heel and a deep pattern, like a boot. Just one print. Right beside the book. I stood there, listening hard, trying not to breathe too loud. I didn't hear anything. Still, I backed out of that hallway instead of turning around. Back downstairs, I tried calling Carl. The call failed. I tried texting him. The message didn't send. So I wrote in the binder, 1:20 a.m. noise upstairs. Book fell from shelf. Possible prior entry. I didn't write boot print, because honestly, writing it down made it feel more real than I wanted it to. At 2 a.m., I had to do the second inside check. I almost skipped it. I really did. But I kept thinking, if someone was inside the house and I ignored it, then I'd be the idiot who got paid $400 to sit in the kitchen and do nothing. So I started another round. The first floor was quiet. Too quiet. Honestly, old houses usually make noise constantly, especially in wind and rain. But for a while, the mansion went completely still. No creaks. No pipes. Nothing. I checked the library, the dining room, the front sitting room, and the rear patio door. All locked. Then I went back toward the kitchen hallway. That's when I heard the dragging sound. It came from below me. Not upstairs this time. Below. A slow, heavy scrape. Like something being pulled across concrete. I stopped in the hallway. The basement door was about 15 feet away. The sound came again. Scrape. Scrape. I don't know how to explain this without sounding dramatic, but my body reacted before my brain did. My stomach dropped, my mouth went dry, and every part of me wanted to leave. I aimed my flashlight at the basement door. It was still closed. But when I walked closer, I saw something on the floor in front of it. Water. A thin line of muddy water had seeped out from under the door that had not been there earlier. I crouched and touched it with 2 fingers. Cold, dirty, real, I stood up and checked the handle. Still locked. I leaned closer to the door and listened. For maybe 10 seconds, there was nothing. Then, from the other side, someone coughed. A human cough. Low, wet, close to the door. I jumped back so hard, I hit the opposite wall. My first thought was, someone's living in the basement. That sounds crazy, but it was also the most reasonable explanation. Some homeless guy, some squatter, maybe one of those urban explorers who got in earlier and hid when I arrived. I backed away from the door and went straight to the kitchen to grab my phone. Still no service. I tried 911 anyway. The call didn't go through. That's when I made the dumbest decision of the night. I decided to open the basement door. I know. Everybody always thinks they would do the smart thing in that situation. They'd leave, call the cops, wait outside. But in real life, when you're alone, cold, tired, and trying to convince yourself that the situation is normal, you make stupid choices. I thought if it was some guy hiding down there, maybe I could scare him out, or at least confirm it and then get out of the house. I unlocked the deadbolt first, then the lower lock. Before I opened the door, I said, "Hey, I know you're down there. This is private property. Police are being called." Silence. I opened the door about 6 inches. The smell that came out was awful. Damp concrete. Old water. Mildew. Something like spoiled food. I pointed my flashlight down the stairs. The basement steps were narrow and wooden, leading down into a dark concrete room. At the bottom of the stairs, I could see part of an old coal furnace, some shelves, and a wall with pipes running along it. I didn't go all the way down. I only went 3 steps. That was enough. There were muddy boot prints on the stairs, fresh ones, going up and down. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I called out again, "Come out now." Nothing. Then something moved near the furnace. Just a shift in the dark. My flashlight caught the edge of a coat sleeve disappearing behind the furnace. I turned around immediately. Nope, no freaking way. I ran back up the stairs, slammed the basement door, and locked it again with both locks. My hands were shaking so bad, it took me 3 tries to get the key in. The second the deadbolt clicked, someone hit the door from the basement side. Hard. Once. The whole door jumped in the frame. I stumbled backward. Then it happened again. Boom. Then again. Boom. Not fast. Not frantic. Slow and deliberate. Like whoever was down there wanted me to understand they weren't scared. I grabbed the binder, my flashlight, and my thermos, and I headed for the front door. I was done. The front door opened inward, and it had a heavy old lock. I unlocked it and pulled. Nothing. I pulled again. It didn't move. For a second, I thought I had forgotten another lock, but I checked everything. The knob lock was open. The deadbolt was open. The door still wouldn't budge. I threw my shoulder into it. It moved maybe half an inch and stopped. Something was blocking it from the outside. That realization hit me like ice water. Somebody had jammed the front door. That meant whoever was messing with me wasn't just in the basement. There was someone outside too. Or the same person had been outside earlier and somehow gotten back in. I turned and ran toward the rear patio door. Behind me, the banging on the basement door stopped. That was worse. The rear patio door was in the dining room. It had tall glass panels and a brass lock that needed one of the estate keys. I fumbled through the ring, trying to find the right one, but there were at least 20 keys on it. While I was trying them, I heard the basement door open, not break. Open, the locks clicked. Then the door creaked inward. I stopped breathing. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. From somewhere down the hall, a man's voice said, "Mike," not loud, not angry, just calm, like he knew me. That was the worst part. My name wasn't on my jacket. I hadn't said it out loud. The only place my name was written was in the binder on the kitchen table, where I had signed the log when I arrived. So either whoever was in the house had been close enough to read it, or they had known I was coming before I got there. I found the right key. The patio door opened, and cold rain hit my face. I didn't even close it behind me. I ran out across the back terrace and into the garden. The mud was slick, and I almost fell twice. I had planned to circle around to my truck, but when I reached the side of the house, I saw something that made me stop. My truck's interior light was on. It was parked in the front driveway, maybe 50 yards away. The driver's side door was open, and someone was sitting inside. I could only see the shape of them through the rain and the windshield. A dark figure in the driver's seat, sitting perfectly still. My first thought was that maybe it was a cop. Maybe Carl had sent someone else. Maybe I was saved. Then the figure leaned forward, and my headlights flashed once. Just once. Like whoever was inside had tapped the switch. That was enough for me. I turned and ran the other way. I didn't take the driveway because I'd have to pass the truck. Instead, I cut through the side lawn toward the gate, using my phone flashlight because my main flashlight had started flickering. The whole time, I could hear movement behind me. Not close enough to grab me, but close enough. Wet grass being stepped on. Branches snapping. Someone moving through the dark, not running, just following. That's what scared me the most. They weren't in a hurry. It felt like they knew I had nowhere good to go. When I reached the gate, it was closed. I punched in the code. Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. The keypad was dead. I looked back toward the mansion. Through the rain, I could see the front of the house. The patio door I had left open was a black rectangle in the back wall. My truck was still sitting in the driveway with the interior light on. Then the truck door slowly closed. I climbed the gate. I ripped my jacket on one of the iron spikes and cut my palm open, but I didn't care. I dropped onto the other side, landed badly on my ankle, and limped down the road until my phone finally got one bar. I called 911. When the police arrived, I told them someone was inside the property and possibly inside my truck. I didn't mention the voice saying my name. I didn't mention how the basement door unlocked itself. I didn't want to sound like I had lost it. 2 officers went inside the estate. One stayed with me near the gate. About 20 minutes later, the officers came back out. They didn't find anyone, but they did find signs that someone had been there. In the basement, behind the old furnace, they found a sleeping bag, empty cans of food, cigarette butts, a small battery-powered radio, and a pile of old clothes. One officer said it looked like someone had been using that basement for a while. They also found a second way in. There was an old coal chute on the side of the house, almost hidden under vines and wet leaves. It had been pried open from the outside. Someone small enough could crawl through it and drop into the basement. That explained a lot. Not everything, but a lot. The front door had been wedged shut from the outside with a piece of wood. My truck door was closed and locked by the time they checked it. Nothing was missing, but the driver's seat was wet and there was mud on the floor mat. The police asked if I knew anyone who might want to mess with me. I said no. They asked if Carl or the owners had told me someone might be living on the property. I said no. One of the officers gave me this look like he didn't fully believe that, but he didn't push it. Carl showed up around 4:30 in the morning. He was wearing a raincoat over pajamas and looked annoyed more than concerned. That bothered me right away. He talked to the cops for a few minutes, then came over to me and said, "You okay?" I said, "Somebody's living in your basement." He sighed and rubbed his face. Not shocked. Not surprised. Just tired. I said, "You knew?" He said, "We suspected people had been getting in." I told him there was a big difference between people getting in and someone living behind the furnace. He didn't say anything. Then I asked him why the basement warning was in the instructions. He looked back at the house and said, "Because this isn't the first time we've had trouble down there." That was all he would say. The next morning, Carl called and told me the owners were willing to pay me the full amount if I signed a short statement saying I wouldn't discuss the property publicly. I told him I wasn't signing anything. He said, "Mike, be smart. It's just rich people trying to protect a property sale." I said, "Then why did the guy know my name?" Carl went quiet. Then he said, "Your name was in the binder." That was true. But the way he said it made me think he had already considered that answer before I asked. A few days later, I picked up my truck from a towing yard. Carl had arranged for it to be moved from the estate because I refused to go back there. The truck smelled like wet dirt. There was mud on the driver's side floor and along the edge of the seat. I checked everything. Glove box, back seat, under the seats. Nothing was missing. But there was something in the cup holder. A folded piece of paper. It was one of the pages from the security binder. The sign-in sheet. My name was circled in black pen. Under it, someone had written, "You came back." I stood there in the towing yard for a long time, just staring at it. I had not been back. Not once. I called the police again, but there wasn't much they could do. They added it to the report. They said it was probably the same person from the basement trying to scare me. Maybe that's all it was. A squatter. A crazy guy. Someone who knew the estate better than anyone else and had been hiding there for weeks, maybe months. That's the most realistic explanation, and honestly, it's the one I try to believe. But there are still things I can't make fit. How did he get from the basement to my truck so fast without me seeing him? How did he unlock the basement door after I locked both locks from the outside? Why did Carl act like this had happened before? And why did that note say, "You came back," like whoever wrote it thought he already knew me? About a month later, curiosity got the best of me, and I started digging into the history of the Blackwood estate. Most of what I found was boring. Old property records, family names, tax disputes, articles about restoration plans that never happened. But I did find one old newspaper clipping from 1978. It was about a caretaker named Arthur Bell who had worked at the estate back when the last Blackwood family member was still alive. According to the article, Arthur disappeared during a winter storm. Police searched the mansion, the grounds, and the woods around the property. They never found him. The strange part was one line near the end of the article. It said investigators found signs that someone had been sleeping in the basement for an unknown amount of time. That could mean anything. Maybe Arthur ran off. Maybe someone else was hiding there. Maybe the estate had always attracted the wrong kind of people. But when I read that line, I got the same cold feeling I had standing outside that basement door. I don't work night security anymore. I still do property maintenance, but only during the day, and never in big vacant houses. People joke that I'm being dramatic, and maybe I am, but there's a difference between being scared of the dark and knowing someone is moving around in it. The last thing I'll say is this. A few weeks after I found that note in my truck, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I was waiting on a mechanic to call me, so I picked up. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then, I heard rain. Not like background noise. Close rain. Like someone was standing outside with the phone. I said, "Hello?" No one answered. Then a man's voice, low and calm, said, "Mike." I hung up immediately. I changed my number the next day, and I still don't know whether the person from the Blackwood estate was some messed up guy living in the basement, or someone connected to the property, or something worse that people had been covering up for years. But I know one thing for sure. That house was not empty. And whoever was inside it knew exactly when I arrived. I used to love abandoned houses. Not because I thought I was brave or anything like that. I wasn't one of those people trying to spend the night in haunted places for attention. I just liked old buildings. I liked the quietness of them. The peeling wallpaper, the old furniture, the way every room looked like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. There was something sad about it, but also kind of beautiful. Me and my friends used to take pictures of abandoned places around rural Vermont. Old barns, closed down diners, empty farmhouses. Places like that. Most of them were harmless. You'd walk around for 20 minutes, take some photos, maybe find an old calendar from 1989 still hanging on the wall, and then leave. It felt creepy, sure, but not dangerous. That changed the night we went to the Hammond Manor. My name is Sarah. I'm from a small town in Vermont, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. And if a car you don't recognize drives down your road, someone's probably going to mention it at the gas station the next morning. This happened about a year ago. At the time, I was 24. My friends Josh and Kyle were around the same age. Kyle was into photography, Josh was into anything that gave him a story to tell, and I was usually the one saying, maybe we shouldn't do that, right before doing it anyway. The Hammond Manor had been sitting abandoned for years. Everybody in town knew about it, but nobody really went there. It was this huge old Victorian house at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by woods and overgrown fields. It had one of those round turret rooms on the side, tall narrow windows, and a front porch that looked like it would collapse if you breathed on it too hard. People said it had been empty since the mid-90s. The owner had died. The family fought over the property. And eventually it just sat there. No one fixed it. No one sold it. No one lived in it. At least, that's what we thought. Josh was the one who found recent pictures of it on some abandoned places forum. The photos looked insane. Moonlight through broken windows, vines growing over the porch, old furniture still inside. It was exactly the kind of place Kyle wanted to shoot. We decided to go on a Friday night. That was our first dumb move. We should have gone during the day. We should have told someone where we were going. We should have checked property records, or at least asked around more. But we were bored, and at that age, bored people can talk themselves into pretty much anything. Kyle picked me up around 10:45 p.m. Josh was already in the passenger seat, messing with a flashlight and acting like we were about to shoot a documentary. He looked back at me and said, "You ready to get famous?" I said, "For trespassing?" He laughed and said, "Relax. We'll be in and out." No big deal. That was the whole attitude that night. No big deal. Just an old house. Just some pictures. Just one quick look around. We got to the dirt road a little after 11:30. Kyle parked his Subaru about a quarter mile away from the property because we didn't want the car seen from the main road. Not because we were planning to do anything bad, but because we knew we technically weren't supposed to be there. That already tells you enough. We walked the rest of the way with our flashlights pointed down, trying not to draw attention. The road was narrow and muddy, with trees pressed in on both sides. The sky was clear, but there was a cold wind moving through the branches. Nobody was talking much by then. The closer we got, the less fun it felt. The woods opened up into an overgrown field, and there it was. The Hammond Manor. It was bigger than I expected. 3 stories, dark siding, steep roof, broken shutters, and that turret on the left side like a watchtower. The front porch sagged badly in the middle, and ivy had crawled all the way up one corner of the house. Kyle whispered, "Damn," Josh said, "told you. This place is sick." But I didn't say anything. Something about it felt off. Not haunted. Not like that. It felt occupied. That's the only word I can use. The house was dark, and there were no cars, no lights, no smoke from the chimney, nothing. But I still had this strong feeling that we were walking up to someone's home. We crossed the field and stepped onto the porch. The wood was soft under our shoes. One board cracked under Josh's foot, and he froze. Then gave us this embarrassed smile like he hadn't almost fallen through the porch. The front door was locked. One of the tall windows beside it had been broken long before we got there. There were old leaves gathered on the inside sill, and the glass around the frame was dirty. Josh reached through, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. The door made this long, low creak that seemed way too loud in the quiet. Right away, the smell came out. Damp wood, dust, mouse droppings, old carpet, and underneath all that, a faint smell of smoke. Not fireplace smoke, more like cigarette smoke. I noticed it immediately, but I didn't say anything at first. I thought maybe it was just the smell of old wood or mold messing with my head. We stepped into the foyer. Our flashlights moved across dark wooden floors, a cracked mirror, a small table near the wall, and a staircase going up to the second floor. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips, and there were framed pictures still hanging crookedly on the walls. Everything was covered in dust. Thick dust. That made me feel better for a minute. Dust means nobody's been around, right? That's what I told myself. Kyle started taking photos. Every time his camera flash went off, the whole foyer lit up for half a second. It made the place look even worse. In the dark, your imagination fills things in. But in the flash, you actually see everything: the water stains, the broken banister, the animal droppings, the dark marks on the walls. Josh wanted to go upstairs first. I told him no. The stairs looked weak, and I didn't want to be on the second floor of a rotting house at midnight. So we checked the first floor. The first room was a sitting room with a fireplace and an old couch covered by a sheet. There were books scattered on the floor, and a small side table had collapsed on one side. Kyle took pictures of the fireplace, then the mirror above it. In the mirror, I saw the hallway behind us. For half a second, I thought I saw something move at the edge of the reflection. I turned around fast. "Nothing," Josh noticed and said. "What?" I said, "Nothing. I thought I saw something." He grinned and said, "Already?" I told him to shut up. We moved into what used to be a library. The shelves were built into the walls, mostly empty except for a few swollen books that looked ruined from moisture. There was a broken chair in the corner, and an old rug bunched up near the doorway. Kyle set his camera bag on a dusty desk and started switching lenses. That detail matters later. While he was doing that, Josh started opening drawers. I whispered, "Don't touch everything." He whispered back, "I'm not stealing anything." I said, "That's not the point." He rolled his eyes, but he stopped. That's when we heard a noise upstairs. One creak. Just one. We all looked up. Old houses creak. We knew that. So we waited. Nothing else happened. Kyle said, "Probably wind." Josh said, "Or rats." I wanted to believe either one. We kept going. The next room was the dining room. That was where the night changed. It was a long room with tall windows on one wall and a huge wooden dining table in the center. 8 chairs were pushed in around it. The chandelier above the table was hanging crooked, covered in cobwebs. The floor was dusty. The table was dusty. The chairs were dusty. Everything looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Except for the middle of the table. There was a clean white plate sitting there. And on that plate was a red apple. A fresh apple. Not fake. Not rotten. Not dried up. Fresh, shiny, like someone had put it there that afternoon. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Kyle raised his camera, but didn't take the picture right away. Josh moved closer and shined his flashlight on it. There was a clean circle in the dust around the plate, like someone had wiped the table before setting it down. I remember whispering, "We need to go." Josh said, "Maybe someone was here earlier." I said, "Exactly." Kyle finally took the picture. The flash went off. And from upstairs, something answered. Not a voice. A sound. A soft click. Like another camera shutter. All 3 of us froze. Kyle lowered his camera slowly. Josh whispered, "Was that yours?" Kyle said no. We stood there listening. A few seconds passed. Then we heard another sound from above us. A floorboard creaking. Slow. Then another. It wasn't random settling. It was too steady. Someone was walking. Josh called out, "Hello?" I hated him for doing that. His voice traveled through the house and seemed to hang there. Nobody answered. But in the dining room, one of the chairs made a soft scraping sound. We turned. One chair near the far end of the table had moved back a few inches. Maybe the floor was uneven. Maybe the vibration from us walking caused it. Maybe. But I don't believe that. Because it moved toward us. Kyle whispered, "Nope." We're leaving. For once, Josh didn't argue. We backed out of the dining room and headed for the foyer. That's when Kyle stopped and patted his jacket pockets. He whispered, "Where's my lens cap?" Josh said, "Dude, forget it." Kyle looked panicked. "No, that lens was expensive." I said, "Kyle, seriously, leave it." But he was already shining his flashlight back toward the library. He said he must have left it on the desk when he changed lenses. I wanted to leave right then, but he was moving back toward the library, and I didn't want him going alone. So we all went. That was our second dumb move. The library looked exactly like we had left it, except Kyle's camera bag was zipped shut. He stopped in the doorway. "I didn't zip that," he whispered. Josh said, "Are you sure?" Kyle looked at him like he was stupid. His lens cap wasn't on the desk. It wasn't on the floor. It wasn't anywhere. Then we heard something upstairs again. This time, the sound was closer to the staircase. A slow footstep. Then another. Then silence. I whispered, "Someone is in here." Josh picked up a broken chair leg from the floor. I remember thinking it looked pathetic. Like, what was he going to do with that? Fight some guy in a dark abandoned house with a chair leg? Kyle said, "Let's just go." We headed back to the foyer. The front door was maybe 20 feet away when something small dropped from above and hit one of the steps. Then it rolled down the staircase. Tap, tap, tap. It came to a stop at the bottom. Kyle aimed his flashlight at it. It was his lens cap. None of us moved. My skin went cold. That meant whoever was upstairs had been in the library after us, taken it, and brought it to the stairs. Josh yelled, "Who are you?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then a man's voice from the top of the staircase said, "You forgot this." His voice was calm. That was what made it so scary. He didn't sound drunk. He didn't sound surprised. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like he had been waiting for the right moment to join the conversation. Kyle whispered, "Go." We moved toward the front door. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't open. Josh shoved me aside and tried it. Still nothing. The lock was turned. The door should have opened. But it only moved maybe an inch before hitting something solid. Something was blocking it from the outside. Josh whispered, "No freaking way." That was when we heard the man start walking down the stairs. Thump, 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 slow, heavy, like he wasn't in any hurry. Kyle aimed his flashlight up. A man stepped into view on the landing. He looked maybe late 40s or early 50s, though it was hard to tell in the beam of the flashlight. His hair was long and greasy, hanging around his face. He had on a dark jacket, dirty jeans, and work boots. One boot was untied. In his right hand, he was holding a jagged piece of wood. It looked like part of a broken railing, maybe 2 feet long, with splintered edges. He stared down at us with this flat, empty expression. Then, he smiled a little and said, "You brought lights." Nobody said anything. Josh tried to sound tough and said, "Stay right there." The man looked at him, then looked at the broken chair leg in Josh's hand. He said, "That's mine." That was all it took. We ran, not toward the front door, toward the library. Kyle remembered the window in there was cracked, and we figured if we couldn't get out the door, we could break our way out. Behind us, the man kept coming down the stairs. He wasn't running. That made it worse. If he had chased us, at least it would have felt normal. but he moved slowly, like he knew the house better than we did and didn't need to hurry. We burst into the library. Josh grabbed an old wooden chair and slammed it into the window. The first hit cracked it. The second hit shattered part of it. The third hit broke enough glass for us to climb through. Kyle went first. He cut his hand on the frame, but he didn't stop. I was halfway through when I looked back. The man was standing in the library doorway. He wasn't rushing us. He was just watching. Then he said, "You're letting the cold in." I dropped out of the window and hit the wet ground hard. Josh came out right after me. We ran across the side yard toward the tree line. I could hear Kyle ahead of us, breathing hard and swearing under his breath. Branches hit my arms and face. My shoes were sliding in the mud. We didn't stop until we reached the dirt road. Then, we ran all the way back to Kyle's car. That was when we found the driver's side door open. The dome light was on. Kyle stopped so fast, I almost ran into him. He whispered. I locked it. Josh said, "Are you sure?" Kyle yelled, "Yes, I'm sure." The glove box was open. The center console was open. Kyle's registration papers were on the passenger seat. Nothing seemed stolen. But on the driver's seat was the apple from the dining room. The same red apple. I know people will say maybe there were two apples. Maybe. But this one had the same small bruise near the stem that we had noticed on the plate. Kyle just stood there staring at it. Josh grabbed the apple and threw it as hard as he could into the woods. Then, Kyle got in, started the car, and backed out so fast, the tires spun in the mud. As we drove away, I looked through the rear window. At the edge of the dirt road, near the tree line, I saw a flashlight turn on. It wasn't waving. It wasn't moving. It was just pointed down at the ground, low and steady. Someone was standing there, watching us leave. None of us talked for a while. Kyle's hand was bleeding from the broken window. Josh had scratches across his face. I had mud all over my jeans, and my hip was throbbing from where I hit the ground. When we got back to the main road and had cell service, I told Kyle to call the police. Josh didn't want to. He said, "We were trespassing." I said, "I don't care. There's a guy living in that house with a weapon." So Kyle called. We waited at a gas station about 10 minutes away until two police cars met us. We told them everything, except we tried to leave out the parts that made us sound extra stupid. But we did admit we went inside. The officers weren't thrilled about that, obviously. But once Kyle showed them his hand and told them the guy had blocked the door, they took it seriously. We led them back to the dirt road, but stayed near the cars while they went in. They were inside the manor for maybe 25 minutes. When they came back, they said they didn't find the man, but they did find proof someone had been staying there. Upstairs, in one of the bedrooms, there was a mattress on the floor, blankets, empty food cans, bottled water, cigarette butts, a camping stove, batteries, a cheap prepaid phone with no SIM card. There were even fresh socks hanging over the back of a chair. They also found a second entrance. One of the rear cellar doors had been forced open and then hidden behind old boards and brush. Someone could come and go without using the front door at all. That explained how he got in. It did not explain how the front door got blocked while we were inside. The officers found a broken piece of wood wedged under the front porch door from outside. They said someone must have placed it there after we entered. That meant the man either slipped out through the cellar door while we were inside, blocked the front door, then came back in upstairs, or there was more than one person. I didn't like either option. The police searched the woods for a while, but didn't find him. They took our statements, warned us that we could have been cited for trespassing, and told us not to go back. Trust me, they did not have to tell me twice. A few days later, the police called Kyle. They said they had a possible suspect, a man named Dennis, who had been caught sleeping in vacant buildings around the county before. He had a history of trespassing, theft, and threatening people when confronted. But they couldn't prove it was him. By the time they searched the manor again with the owner's permission, the upstairs bedroom had been cleared out. The mattress was gone. The blankets were gone. The canned food was gone. Even the plate from the dining room table was gone. Whoever had been there knew enough to move fast. For about a week, we tried not to talk about it. Josh made jokes because that's what Josh does when he's scared. He called the guy Appleman and acted like it was this crazy story we'd laugh about later. Kyle didn't joke at all. He barely spoke about it. Then one night, he texted me one photo. No message, just the photo. It was one he had taken in the library before everything happened. In the picture, Josh is standing near the shelves, looking down at something. I'm near the doorway, turned slightly toward the hall. The camera flash lit up most of the room. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, I noticed the cracked mirror above the fireplace. In the reflection, you can see part of the corner behind Kyle, and there is a man crouched behind the covered chair, low to the ground, half hidden, staring directly toward the camera. His face is blurry, but you can see one eye reflecting the flash. That was the worst part, because that photo was taken before the apple, before the footsteps, before the voice. He had been in the room with us from the beginning, close enough to hear us whispering, close enough to watch Kyle change his camera lens, close enough to take the lens cap after we left. I called Kyle immediately. He answered, but neither of us said anything for a few seconds. Finally, he said, I didn't see him. I said, none of us did. He deleted most of the pictures from that night, but he kept that one. I think he needed proof that it happened. I did too, honestly. A month later, Josh told me something he hadn't told us before. We were sitting in his truck after work, and the story came up because Kyle had sent the mirror photo again. Josh got quiet, which was unusual for him. Then he said, when I was climbing out the window, he got close to me. I asked what he meant. Josh stared out the windshield for a while. Then he said, he whispered something. I asked, what did he say? Josh said, he said, next time knock. That line still makes my stomach turn. Because to that man, we weren't random people breaking into an abandoned house. We were visitors. Rude visitors. People entering his space without permission. After that, I stopped going into abandoned buildings. Completely. Kyle stopped too. Josh pretended he hadn't, but he did. Anytime someone mentioned exploring some old house or factory, he suddenly had something else to do. Last I heard, the Hammond Manor was boarded up properly. There are fresh no trespassing signs posted along the road now, and someone put a chain across the driveway. But people still talk about it online. Every few months, I'll see someone post a picture from the road, asking if anybody knows how to get inside. I never comment. I want to. I want to tell them that the house isn't worth it, that no photo is worth walking into a place where someone may already be watching you from a corner. But I know how warnings sound when you're young and curious. They sound like part of the fun. That's exactly what we thought too. Until we found that apple. Until the door wouldn't open. Until we saw the photo. And until we realized the man in the house wasn't hiding because he was afraid of us. He was hiding because he wanted to see how long it would take us to notice him. I used to think you could know a house just by living in it. You learn which floorboards creak, which windows stick, which door needs to be pulled up a little before the latch catches. After a while, even a big old house starts to feel predictable. At least, that's what I thought. Then I inherited my uncle's mansion in upstate New York, and within 2 weeks, I realized there were parts of that house that had been deliberately hidden, not forgotten. Hidden. My name is Derek. I'm from just outside Rochester, New York, and this happened a little over 2 years ago. My uncle Raymond passed away unexpectedly and left me his house. Calling it a house feels wrong though. It was a mansion. A huge mid-1800s place sitting on a hill outside Naples, New York, surrounded by trees and old stone walls. From the outside, it looked almost beautiful. Dark stone exterior, tall windows, wraparound porch, 3 floors, and a view of the valley that probably looked amazing during the day. But at night, the place felt different. It felt like it was watching the road below. My uncle had lived there alone for years. He wasn't close to anyone in the family. When I was younger, I only saw him a few times. He was quiet, awkward, and always seemed like he was in a hurry to leave. My mom called him private. My dad called him paranoid. I didn't know him well enough to call him anything. So when the lawyer told me Raymond had left the mansion to me, I thought there had to be some kind of mistake. But there wasn't. I was apparently the only relative he mentioned by name in the will. At first, I planned to sell the place. Then I went to see it. The house needed work, no question. The roof had a few bad spots. Some pipes needed replacing. A few rooms had water damage, but underneath all that, the place had serious value. Original wood floors, marble fireplaces, built-in shelves, old stained glass, the kind of details people pay a stupid amount of money for. I figured I'd fix it slowly, 1 room at a time, then either move in or sell it for a much better price. That was the plan. I moved in at the end of September. Not fully. I still kept my apartment near Rochester, but I started staying at the mansion a few nights a week while I cleaned and worked on small repairs. The first few nights were creepy, but in the normal old house way. The pipes knocked, the floors creaked, wind moved through gaps in the windows. Sometimes the radiators made this clicking sound even when the heat wasn't on. It was weird, but not enough to scare me out. I had grown up around old homes. I knew they made noise. What I didn't know was that this house had a space inside it that wasn't on the blueprints. My uncle had kept a bunch of documents in his study: tax records, inspection papers, old receipts, and a set of blueprints from the 1940s. I used those blueprints all the time because I didn't want to start tearing into walls without knowing what I was dealing with. About a week after I started staying there, I was measuring the second floor hallway. The layout was supposed to be simple. Master bedroom at the end of the hall. Guest room beside it. Bathroom across from them. 2 smaller bedrooms closer to the stairs. But when I measured from the master bedroom wall to the guest room wall, something was off. There were about 5 feet missing. At first, I thought I had measured wrong, so I did it again. Same result. Then, I measured from inside both rooms. Same result again. There was a narrow space between the master bedroom and guest room that shouldn't have been there. From the hallway, it just looked like a normal wall. Old wallpaper, dark wooden trim, a small framed painting hanging in the middle. But once I started looking closely, I noticed the wallpaper didn't match perfectly. The pattern was the same, but the color was a little off, like that section had been redone much later than the rest of the hallway. I took down the painting. Behind it, the wallpaper had a faint vertical line running down it, then another line on the other side. A rectangle. I tapped the wall. Most of it sounded solid, but the middle sounded hollow. I remember standing there with my tape measure in one hand, just staring at it. Then I said out loud, "What the hell is this?" I sent a picture to my friend Mark, who works construction. He texted back, "Could be an old closet somebody sealed up." That explanation made sense. Old houses get changed all the time. Doors get covered. Closets get removed. Servant passages get sealed. It didn't have to be anything creepy. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I slept in the master bedroom for the first time. Until then, I had been sleeping downstairs on the couch because it was easier while I was cleaning. But I wanted to start using the actual bedroom, so I dragged in an air mattress, a lamp, a space heater, and a folding table. The master bedroom had 2 tall windows facing the back of the property. Outside was just woods and darkness. I fell asleep around midnight. At about 2:30 in the morning, I woke up. Not because of a bang, because of a small sound. Scratch, scratch. I lay there in the dark, listening. At first, I thought it was a mouse. That was the easy explanation. The house was old. I had already seen mouse droppings in the pantry. Scratch, scratch. But the sound didn't move around like an animal. It stayed in one place, right behind the hallway wall. I sat up. The air mattress made that loud plastic sound, and immediately the scratching stopped. I waited. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark and cold. The beam of my flashlight landed on the sealed section of wall. It looked normal. I walked closer and pressed my ear against it. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then I heard one soft tap, right beside my ear, from the other side. I jumped back so fast I almost slipped. I know that sounds dramatic, but when you're alone in a big house at 2 in the morning and something taps back from inside a sealed wall, you don't exactly handle it like a tough guy. I slept downstairs that night. Actually, I barely slept at all. The next morning, I called Mark. He came over after work with a stud finder, a moisture meter, and one of those little inspection cameras contractors use to look behind walls. He was laughing when he walked in. He said, "So you found Narnia?" I told him I wasn't kidding. We went upstairs, and I showed him the wall. He measured everything himself, checked the blueprints, and then tapped around the seam. After a minute, he stopped joking. He said, "Yeah, there's definitely something back there." He drilled a tiny hole near the baseboard and pushed the inspection camera in. The camera only went a few inches before hitting old wood. Not drywall, not plaster. Wood. He said it looked like a door or some kind of interior panel. I asked if it could be dangerous. He shrugged and said, structurally, probably not. Emotionally, maybe. That was Mark's sense of humor. He asked if I wanted him to open it. I said no. I don't know why. Looking back, that was dumb. But in that moment, I didn't want to open it while it was getting dark outside. Something about that hidden space felt too intentional. Before Mark left, he said, "Whoever sealed this did a clean job." I asked what he meant. He said, "It's not professional, but it's careful. Like they weren't trying to remodel. They were trying to hide it." That line stuck in my head all night. I didn't sleep upstairs again. I slept on the couch in the front sitting room with a flashlight, my phone, and a hammer on the coffee table. I felt ridiculous, but not ridiculous enough to put the hammer away. Around 1:40 a.m., I heard footsteps overhead. 3 slow steps, directly above the sitting room. Step, 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 then silence. I sat up and stared at the ceiling. Old houses make noises. I kept telling myself that. But houses don't take 3 steps and stop. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I waited almost 10 minutes before going upstairs. When I got to the hallway, it was empty. The sealed wall looked the same, but the painting I had taken down earlier was now leaning against the opposite wall. I know I left it flat on the hallway floor. I know that for sure, because I had almost stepped on it when Mark and I were checking the seam. Now it was upright, leaning neatly, facing the hidden door. That was the first time I seriously considered leaving the house for good. But I didn't, because people are stupid when they want an explanation. The next day I checked every door and window. Front door locked, back door locked, basement hatch locked, windows locked, no broken glass, no footprints outside that I could see. Then I went into the attic. The attic was horrible. Low beams, exposed insulation, dust everywhere, and dead bugs piled along the window frames. But while I was up there, I noticed an old vent near the floor behind some insulation. It wasn't part of the modern fax system. It looked older. When I shined my flashlight inside, I could see that it ran horizontally toward the part of the house where the master bedroom and guest room were. I didn't crawl in. I'm not that dumb. But I took a picture. Later, I compared it to the hallway, and it looked like the vent might run behind or above the hidden space. That was when the whole thing started feeling less like a sealed closet and more like a passage. That night, I tried to prove to myself I was overreacting. I sat in the second floor hallway across from the hidden wall with my flashlight off and my phone recording audio. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. I started feeling stupid. Then I heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. This time it came from low on the wall, close to the floor. I turned on the flashlight. The sound stopped instantly. There was something on the floor under the seam. At first, I thought it was dust or paint, but when I picked it up, I realized it was a strip of old wallpaper, freshly peeled. The back of it was clean, not dusty, not brittle. Clean. I shined my flashlight along the bottom of the hidden door. There was a tiny gap now, maybe a 1/4 inch. And from that gap came a smell I recognized immediately. Cigarette smoke. Not old smoke. fresh smoke. I left the house 10 minutes later. I didn't pack. I didn't shut everything down. I grabbed my keys and wallet and drove back to my apartment in Rochester at almost 3 in the morning. The entire drive, I kept checking my rearview mirror. The next day, I called the police non-emergency line and explained that I believed someone might be accessing the house somehow. 2 officers met me there in the afternoon. They walked through the property with me. I showed them the hidden seam, the gap at the bottom, and the old vent in the attic. They checked the basement, attic, closets, exterior doors, and windows. They didn't find anyone. One of the officers asked, "Who else has keys?" I said nobody, as far as I knew. He said, "Change the locks anyway." So I did. That same evening, I replaced the locks on the front and back doors. I also put a cheap motion camera above the front porch and another one facing the rear entrance. For 2 nights, nothing happened. No scratching, no footsteps, no smoke smell. I started thinking maybe the police visit had scared whoever it was away. Or maybe I really had let the place mess with my head. Then, on the 3rd morning, I walked into the kitchen and found a coffee mug in the sink. That might not sound scary, but it stopped me cold. I hadn't unpacked dishes yet. I was drinking out of paper cups. The mug was white with a faded blue flower pattern. It wasn't mine. There was black coffee in the bottom, still wet. I checked the cameras. Nobody came through the front door. Nobody came through the back door. The windows were locked. The basement hatch was locked. No forced entry. That meant someone either never left or they had another way in. That was when I decided the hidden room had to be opened. I called Mark, but he couldn't come until the weekend. I didn't want to wait that long. So I went to the hardware store and bought a crowbar, a utility knife, heavy gloves, and a respirator mask. I waited until afternoon, with sunlight coming through the hallway windows. I was not opening that thing at night. I cut along the seam first. Layers of paint and caulk came off in long, hard strips. Whoever sealed it had done the whole thing carefully. Caulk around the edges, paint over that, wallpaper over that. It took almost an hour just to expose the shape of the door. There were no hinges visible because they were on the inside. There was no handle because it had been removed and filled over. I wedged the crowbar into the side and pulled. At first, nothing. Then the wood shifted. It made a long cracking sound that echoed down the hallway. I pulled again. The door moved inward, maybe an inch. Dust fell from the top. A stale smell leaked out. Old wood, cigarettes, and something metallic. I stood there for a while, just listening. No movement, no scratching. I pulled one more time. The door popped open about a foot. It wasn't a closet. It was a tiny room, maybe 5 feet wide and 8 feet deep. My flashlight hit the inside and bounced back from every direction. Mirrors. Every wall had mirrors on it. Some were old and cloudy. Some were cracked. Some were cheap square mirrors, like the kind you buy at a hardware store. They weren't arranged nicely. They were nailed, or taped, or leaned into place. The floor had broken mirror pieces scattered across it. In the center of the room was a wooden chair facing the door. On the chair was a photograph. I didn't step inside. I reached in with the crowbar and pulled the chair closer. The photograph slid onto the floor. It was a picture of me, taken that morning through the kitchen window. I was standing by the sink, holding the coffee mug I had found. That detail made my legs feel weak. Because I had only picked the mug up for maybe 2 seconds before putting it back down. Whoever took that picture had been outside the kitchen window at that exact moment. I backed away from the room and called 911. This time, the police took it seriously. They searched the hidden room, then the attic and the master bedroom closet. Behind a loose wooden panel in the back of the closet, they found a narrow crawl space. It connected to the hidden room. From there, it ran upward toward the old attic vent. It wasn't easy to move through. You would have to crawl, but a person could fit. Inside that crawl space, police found cigarette butts, a small flashlight, a cheap digital camera, and a folded blanket. They also found more photographs, pictures of the kitchen, pictures of the hallway, pictures of me sleeping downstairs on the couch. That one still makes me sick. There was also a photo of Mark in the hallway from the day he came over. Whoever had been inside the walls had watched both of us. Then one officer found a small notebook tucked behind one of the mirrors. Most of it was boring at first glance. Dates, times, short notes. But then, I saw my name. Derek arrived 7:12 p.m. kitchen light on. Slept downstairs again. Friend came. Construction guy. Found wall. Changed locks. Still scared. I just stared at that last line. Still scared. It didn't feel like a note someone wrote to remember facts. It felt like someone enjoying the fact that I knew something was wrong, but couldn't prove it yet. The police asked if I knew anyone who would want to scare me. I said no. They asked about my uncle. I told them I barely knew him. One detective asked if Raymond ever mentioned anyone living on the property. Maybe a caretaker, handyman, tenant, anyone like that. I said no. But the truth is, I didn't know much about my uncle's life at all. The police collected the camera, notebook, cigarette butts, and photos. They told me not to stay in the house until they finished checking it. Trust me, that was not a problem. I went back to my apartment and slept with the lights on. A few days later, the detective called me. They hadn't identified the person. The fingerprints they found were incomplete. The camera had no memory card. The notebook didn't have a name. The cigarette butts were taken as evidence, but I never heard if anything came from that. The detective did tell me one thing that made it worse. The hidden room itself was old, probably decades old, but the mirrors were from different time periods. Some looked like they had been there for years. Others were recent. That meant someone had been maintaining that room. Not necessarily the same person the whole time, but someone. After that, I started going through my uncle's things, but only with Mark and another friend there. No way was I going back alone. In my uncle's study, inside a locked file cabinet, we found old receipts, insurance documents, and a folder labeled repairs. Most of it was normal. But one invoice stood out. It was from almost 12 years earlier, paid to a local handyman for interior wall closure and hallway finishing. No company name, just a first name, Ellis, paid in cash. I didn't know anyone named Ellis. Neither did my parents. The detective took a copy of the invoice, but as far as I know, they never found the guy. Inside that same file cabinet, I found an envelope with my name on it. Derek. It had not been mailed. It was just sitting there with the other papers. Inside was a short note in my uncle's handwriting. It said, "If you find the space between the rooms, do not stay in the house alone. I should have had it opened properly years ago. I am sorry." That was all. No explanation, no name. No reason why he left the house to me if he knew something was wrong with it. That part bothered me almost as much as the hidden room. My family tried to explain it away. My mom thought Raymond may have been mentally unstable near the end. My dad thought maybe he had been afraid of someone and didn't know how to say it directly. I don't know. All I know is my uncle knew about that room, and he knew enough to warn me. I never moved back into the house. I had a contractor seal the crawl space properly. Not wallpaper, not paint, real framing, screws, boards, and insulation. The mirror room was gutted completely. The mirrors came out. The chair came out. The wall was rebuilt. After that, I sold the property. I didn't get as much as I could have if I had renovated it, but I didn't care. I wanted it out of my life. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. Then about 6 weeks after the sale, I got a padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was one thing. A small brass key. Old, tarnished, and wrapped in a scrap of wallpaper. The wallpaper had the same pattern as the second floor hallway. There was no note, no photograph, no threat, just the key. I took it to the police, but there wasn't much they could do. They added it to the file and told me to call if anything else happened. Nothing else has, at least not directly. But that key messed with me because of what it implied. Someone still had access to something. Maybe another door. Maybe another space. Maybe another part of that house nobody had found. And maybe whoever sent it wanted me to know that. I don't live in old houses anymore. I don't even like staying in older hotels if the hallways feel too narrow. I know that sounds ridiculous, but once you found out someone was watching you through the walls of your own home, you stop feeling stupid about certain fears. Every now and then, I'll be in a hallway somewhere and notice a section of wall that doesn't look quite right. A patch of paint that's slightly different. A seam under old wallpaper. A baseboard that doesn't line up, and I'll catch myself stopping, measuring the distance with my eyes, listening, waiting for that quiet little sound. Scratch, scratch, because now I know something I wish I didn't. A locked room isn't always locked to keep people out. Sometimes it's sealed to keep you from realizing someone has been inside the whole time. I've never liked large windows at night. During the day, they're great. Everybody loves them. You get sunlight, mountain views, trees, snow, whatever it is people want to stare at while drinking coffee. But at night, those same windows change. They stop showing you the outside. They start showing you yourself. And if the lights are on inside, you can see every little thing behind you reflected in the glass, but you can't see more than a few feet past it. The whole outside world just becomes a black wall. The problem is, that only works one way. Anyone standing out there can see you perfectly. You can't see them at all. I learned that the hard way during my second night working security at a private lodge outside Flagstaff, Arizona. My name is Alex. At the time, I was 27 and living just outside Flagstaff. I wasn't doing great financially. I had a part-time maintenance job, but my hours had been cut, my truck needed new tires, and I was already behind on a couple bills. So when a friend of mine told me about a temporary overnight security job that paid cash, I didn't ask too many questions. That was my first mistake. He told me it was at a private lodge owned by some wealthy family from Phoenix. They used it for hunting weekends, company retreats, and holiday trips. It wasn't a public hotel. No guests, no staff, no front desk traffic. Just an empty lodge sitting in the woods. My job sounded simple. Stay there overnight while the owners were gone. Watch the monitors. Keep the doors locked. Do a few interior checks. Call the property manager if anything looked off. That was it. 8 hours of sitting around for decent money. I remember thinking it sounded boring, but boring was exactly what I wanted. The place was called Red Pine Lodge. It sat way north of town, past the normal cabin rentals and vacation homes, at the end of a private gravel road that cut deep into the pines. There was a locked gate off the main road, and from there it was another 6 miles uphill through the forest. The first time I drove there, I kept thinking how bad it would be to break down out there at night. No houses, no streetlights, no cell service after the first mile or two. Just trees and curves and the sound of gravel under your tires. I met the property manager, Ray, on a Monday afternoon. Ray was probably in his late 50s. He had that look some older maintenance guys have, like he could fix a boiler, patch a roof, and tell you were doing something stupid all in the same breath. He was friendly enough, but not warm. He showed me around quickly, like he had somewhere else to be. The lodge itself was beautiful in a rich people who want to pretend they're rugged kind of way. Massive log beams, stone fireplaces, expensive leather couches, polished wood floors, and this giant main hall with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the forest. During the day, that room was amazing. At night, it was the worst room in the building. Ray walked me through the security office, which was really just a small room behind the front desk. There were 8 camera feeds: front gate, driveway, porch, parking lot, rear deck, service entrance, generator shed, and the east trail. The camera quality wasn't great, but it worked. Mostly, Ray showed me the landline at the front desk and a radio in the security office. He said the landline could get spotty in bad weather, and the radio connected to his truck and the caretaker cabin a couple miles down the road. I asked if someone was staying in that cabin. He said, not anymore. That answer felt a little weird, but I didn't press it. Then he gave me the rules. Keep every exterior door locked. Do not leave the lodge during the shift unless there is a fire. If a motion light comes on, check the camera first. If you see an animal, leave it alone. If you see a person, call him before doing anything. And most importantly, don't go wandering outside. I asked if they had trouble with break-ins. Ray looked out through the big glass windows for a second before answering. Sometimes people come up here thinking the place is empty, he said. I asked what kind of people. He shrugged. Hikers, drunks, kids, people who don't know where they are. The way he said it made me think there was more to that list. Before he left, he pointed at the main hall windows and said, "Try not to sit right in front of those all night." I laughed a little and said, "Why?" He said, "Because you'll creep yourself out." Then he left before sunset. My first night was uneventful. I got there around 9:45 p.m., locked the front doors behind me, checked the cameras, and made coffee in the kitchen. The lodge was warm, the fireplace in the main hall was running low, and the whole place smelled like cedar and old smoke. For the first few hours, I just watched the monitors and tried to stay awake. Nothing moved except tree branches and occasional snow flurries drifting through the camera feed. Around 2 a.m., I did an interior walk. Kitchen, dining room, upstairs guest rooms, game room, storage room, staff room. Everything was empty. The lodge made normal noises. Wood popping, wind against the windows, the refrigerator kicking on in the kitchen. Nothing crazy. At about 4:20 in the morning, the motion light on the East Trail camera came on. I looked at the monitor and saw something pale move between the trees. It was low to the ground and fast. I assumed it was a deer or a coyote. I wrote it in the logbook and forgot about it. When Ray arrived a little after 6 a.m., I told him the night had been quiet except for the East Trail light. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me. "The East Trail?" I said, "Yeah, probably a deer." He stared at me for a second too long. Then he said, "Probably. I remember that," because he didn't sound convinced. I went home, slept most of the day, and came back for my second shift that night. The weather had turned ugly. A cold rain had moved in, and thick fog was hanging between the trees. The gravel road was slick, and my truck slid a little on 2 of the sharper turns. By the time I reached the gate, the whole forest looked washed out and gray in my headlights. That was where I noticed the first strange thing. The chain on the gate was locked, but it wasn't wrapped around the post the way Ray had shown me. It was twisted awkwardly, like someone had opened it and locked it again in a hurry. I stood there in the rain with my flashlight on it. The lock wasn't broken. The chain wasn't damaged. But something about it was wrong. I almost turned around right there and drove back into cell range to call Ray. But then I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe he had come up earlier and locked it differently. Maybe I just didn't remember it correctly. So I unlocked the gate, drove through, locked it again, and continued up to the lodge. When I pulled into the parking area, the porch light was flickering. It hadn't done that the night before. Inside, the lodge felt colder than it should have. The thermostat said 68, but the main hall had a draft running through it. I walked around and checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. At 10:18, I noticed static on the East Trail camera. The image kept rolling and bending slightly, like an old TV with bad reception. The other feeds were fine. I wrote it in the log. Then, I sat at the front desk instead of the security office because the chair was more comfortable and I could see the main hall from there. That was another mistake. From that spot, I was directly in view of the big windows. At first, the shift was just slow. Rain tapped on the glass. The fireplace popped every now and then. The security monitors gave off that low electric hum behind me. I had my phone out, but there was no service, so I was just reading old downloaded messages and trying not to fall asleep. Around midnight, the landline rang. I jumped hard enough to spill coffee on the desk. Nobody had called the first night. I picked it up and said, "Red Pine Lodge." There was static. Then a click. Then nothing. I said hello twice. Still nothing. I hung up. A minute later, it rang again. Same thing. Static, then dead air. I tried calling Ray from the landline, but the call wouldn't connect. Then I tried the radio. "Ray, this is Alex at the lodge. You copy?" Only static came back. I tried again. Nothing. The weather was bad, so I didn't panic. Ray had warned me the line and radio could be unreliable. Still, the lodge suddenly felt a lot bigger. At 1:30, I did my first interior check. Everything looked normal until I reached the rear deck door. The deadbolt was locked, but the lower latch was flipped open. I stood there for a second, staring at it. I had checked that door when I arrived. I knew I had. The deadbolt being locked meant the door couldn't open, but the lower latch had definitely been moved. I locked it again and pulled on the door to test it. Solid, outside, the rear deck disappeared into fog and rain. I shined my flashlight through the glass and saw the wooden boards shining wet. Then I noticed a muddy footprint. Just one. It was on the deck directly outside the door. At first, I thought it might be an animal track, but when I leaned closer, I could see toes. A bare human footprint on a freezing wet deck in the middle of the woods. That got my attention. I went straight back to the security office and checked the rear deck camera. The system only recorded motion clips, so I pulled up the most recent one. The clip started at 1:17 a.m. It showed rain, fog, and an empty deck. Then the video froze for about 3 seconds. When it came back, the footprint was there. No person, no movement. Just an empty deck with a footprint that had not been there before. I replayed it several times. Same thing. Freeze, footprint, I tried the radio again. Still only static. That was when I seriously considered leaving. But leaving meant walking outside, crossing the parking area, getting into my truck, driving 6 miles down that road in the fog, then stopping at the gate to unlock it. And if there was someone outside, I did not want to meet them in the open. So I stayed. I locked the security office door and watched the monitors. At 2:06 a.m., the East Trail camera went black. A message appeared on the screen. Signal lost. A few minutes later, the generator shed camera flickered. Not fully out. Just a quick distortion. For half a second, I thought I saw someone near the corner of the shed. Then the feed cleared. Empty. I sat there, staring at the screens, trying to convince myself the rain was messing with the system. Then, I heard something from the main hall. 3 soft knocks. Not on a door. On glass. I stood up slowly. The main hall was dim except for the fireplace and a couple of lamps near the front desk. The giant windows facing the forest looked completely black. I stepped out of the security office and stared at them. At first, I only saw my own reflection. Me standing there with a flashlight in one hand, looking like an idiot. Then, the porch light flickered. In that split second, I saw a pale shape near the tree line. It was standing upright. Not an animal. Not a branch. A person. The light dimmed again, and the glass turned back into a mirror. I didn't move. I didn't want to shine the flashlight at the window, because if someone was really there, then they would know I had seen them. I just watched. A few minutes later, the shape was closer. This time, it was near the edge of the porch steps. I could make out shoulders. A head. The outline of arms hanging straight down. My mouth went dry. I backed toward the desk and grabbed the radio. "Ray, this is Alex. There is someone outside the lodge. Ray, do you copy?" Static. I tried again. Nothing. Then the shape disappeared. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined it. Then I heard the knocks again. This time, they came from the front glass. Soft, careful, close. I looked up. A man's face was inches from the window. He wasn't pressed hard against it. He was just leaning close enough that the porch light caught his features. He looked maybe mid-40s, but it was hard to tell. His hair was soaked and stuck to his forehead. His skin looked pale in the light, and his eyes were open too wide. He didn't look angry. He didn't smile. He just stared at me like he had been standing out there for a long time, waiting for me to look up. I yelled, "Get away from the building." He didn't react, not even a blink. I yelled again, "I'm calling the police." That was a lie, but I needed him to believe it. The man slowly raised one hand. For a second, I thought he was going to wave. Instead, he pointed behind me. I spun around. The main hall was empty. When I looked back, he was gone. On the glass where his face had been, there was a fading oval from his breath. That was the part that made it real. Not the face, not the knocking, the breath on the glass. Because it meant he had been close enough to leave it. I ran back to the security monitors. Front porch showed nothing. Rear deck showed nothing. Service entrance showed nothing. Parking lot showed my truck sitting alone in the rain. Then my truck's headlights flashed once. Just once. I froze. The keys were in my pocket. I checked immediately. Still there. On the monitor, the truck went dark again. Then the interior cab light came on. The driver's side door was open. I felt this horrible sinking feeling in my chest. He had gotten into my truck. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But he had. I was not going outside. Instead, I went to the front desk, grabbed the heavy metal flashlight Ray had left there, and stood in the main hall listening. A few seconds later, I heard a metallic rattle from the backside of the lodge. The service entrance. I moved through the kitchen hallway as quietly as I could. The service door was steel, with a push bar and a deadbolt. As I got close, I heard the handle move. Slowly, not being yanked. Tested up, down, I stood 10 feet away, holding the flashlight with both hands. Then, a voice came from the other side of the door. Alex. My stomach dropped. He knew my name. I didn't answer. The handle stopped moving. Then he said, "You're not Ray." That sentence made no sense to me at first. Then it made too much sense. He had expected someone else. Ray, the property manager. I backed away from the service door and almost slipped on the kitchen mat. My name was in the logbook at the front desk. It was also on the printed schedule Ray had left in the security office. So maybe the guy had seen it through the windows. Maybe he had been inside before. Maybe he had been watching long enough to learn it. But "You're not Ray" bothered me more than my own name. It meant he wasn't there for me. I hurried to the small storage room behind the front desk because Ray had mentioned an emergency alarm panel in there. I should have asked more about it during the walkthrough, but at the time, I figured I'd never need it. I found the panel on the wall. There was a red emergency button under a plastic cover. I flipped it up and pressed it. The lodge alarm exploded through the building. It was so loud it physically hurt. Red lights started flashing in the hall. The security monitors began showing alert messages. Outside, a siren mounted near the roof wailed into the rain. For about 30 seconds, I felt relief. Then the alarm stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The lights cut out. Everything went black except the fireplace. The backup generator should have kicked in. It didn't. From somewhere behind the lodge, I heard the generator cough once and die. That was when I realized he knew the property. This wasn't some random lost guy. He knew where the generator shed was. He knew the camera blind spots. He knew the service entrance. And he knew Ray. A few seconds later, glass broke somewhere in the kitchen. Not the big windows. smaller glass. A kitchen window. I ran. I didn't think about being brave. I didn't think about checking anything. I ran out of the storage room, across the main hall, and up the stairs. Ray had shown me a small staff room on the second floor. It had a lock on the inside and one small window that opened onto a lower section of roof. I got inside, slammed the door, locked it, and shoved the desk in front of it. Then I turned off my flashlight and crouched beside the bed. For a while, I only heard rain and the faint outdoor siren, still going somewhere outside on backup power. Then I heard movement downstairs, slow footsteps across wood, bare feet. That detail sounds strange, but it's true. Shoes sound different. Boots sound different. These were soft, damp steps on the lodge floor. He walked through the main hall. Then the staircase creaked. One step, then another, then another. I pulled out my phone and started recording video, even though there was no service. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I wanted something to exist if things went bad. The footsteps stopped outside the staff room. The doorknob turned once, then again. Then came 3 soft knocks. The same careful rhythm from the glass. I held my breath so hard my chest hurt. The man said, "Alex?" His voice was right outside the door. Then he said, "Ray always leaves before dark." I didn't answer. I didn't move. A few seconds later, something slid under the door. A folded piece of paper. The footsteps stayed there for a moment longer. Then they moved away. I waited until I couldn't hear him anymore before turning on my phone light. The paper was damp at the edges. It was a printed copy of the security schedule. My name was highlighted. Underneath, someone had written in block letters, "Not Ray, I stayed in that room with the desk against the door until I saw real police lights through the small window. Not the lodge alarm. Actual sheriff's vehicles." When deputies came inside, they found me still upstairs, holding the flashlight like I was ready to use it as a weapon. Ray arrived not long after. He looked pale when he saw the broken kitchen window and the schedule with "Not Ray" written on it. That was when I knew he had been hiding something. The deputies searched the lodge and the surrounding property. They found barefoot footprints in the mud near the rear deck, the service entrance, the kitchen window, and my truck. The generator shed door was open. One of the fuel valves had been shut off manually. My truck had been opened, but nothing was stolen. There was mud on the driver's side floor and a wet handprint on the steering wheel. The kitchen window had been broken from the outside, but whoever broke it had already left before deputies arrived. Near the service entrance, they found an old brass key lying in the mud. Ray recognized it. He said it looked like one of the old lodge keys from before the locks were changed years earlier. One of the deputies asked him who used to have keys. Ray didn't answer right away. Then he told them about Wade. Wade had been the previous caretaker. He had lived in the caretaker cabin 2 miles down the private road and worked on the property for almost 10 years. He cleared snow, fixed pipes, checked trails, handled animals, watched the lodge when the owners were gone. According to Ray, Wade started acting strange toward the end. He became convinced the owners were going to sell the lodge. He told people the property was his responsibility and that nobody else knew how to take care of it. When they finally fired him, he didn't leave quietly. He showed up several times after being told to stay away. The owners changed the locks. They filed a trespassing complaint. Then Wade stopped showing up. Ray said everyone assumed he had moved on. The way he said it made me angry. I asked him, "You knew this guy might still be around?" Ray looked exhausted. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "But you thought it was possible." He didn't answer. That was answer enough. The deputies searched the old caretaker cabin that morning. I didn't go with them, but Ray told me later what they found. Someone had been staying there recently. Sleeping bag on the floor. Canned food. Bottled water. Batteries. A radio scanner. Old work gloves. Printed schedules from the lodge office. And photos. Photos of the driveway. Photos of the front windows at night. Photos of Ray's truck. Photos of the front desk. One photo showed me during my first shift, sitting under the warm lights of the main hall, looking down at my phone. It had been taken from outside the glass. That picture bothered me more than almost anything else. Because in it, I looked comfortable, completely unaware. Like bait in a lit room. The deputies looked for Wade, but as far as I know, they never found him. Maybe he left the area. Maybe he was arrested later for something unrelated. Maybe he's still out there somewhere, living in another empty cabin, learning another property, watching another window. I don't know. Ray apologized to me several times that morning. I didn't really care. I quit before the sun was fully up. I didn't even wait around for paperwork. A deputy followed me down to the highway because I refused to stop at that gate alone. I never went back to Red Pine Lodge. A few weeks later, Ray called me. I almost ignored it, but part of me wanted to know if they had found Wade. They hadn't. Ray said the owners had installed blinds on the main hall windows, upgraded the alarm system, replaced every lock, and hired a real security company. Then he told me they had found a notebook inside the caretaker cabin. Most of it was angry, writing about the owners and about how the lodge had been taken from him. Some pages were just lists of dates and times, Ray's arrival times, Ray's departure times, which lights were left on, which doors got checked. Near the end, one phrase was written over and over again. Not Ray, not Ray, not Ray. That was when the whole night finally made sense. He had been waiting for Ray. He had studied Ray's routine, waited for a bad weather night, and planned to scare him, confront him, maybe hurt him. I don't know. But Ray left before dark. And I showed up instead. Some random guy who needed extra cash, sitting behind the front desk in a bright room full of glass, completely visible from the trees. I still think about how close I came to making it worse. If I had gone outside to check the footprint, if I had walked to the generator shed, if I had tried to get to my truck, if that staff room door hadn't locked. People always think they know what they'd do in a situation like that. They think they'd be brave, or smart, or calm. I wasn't any of those things. I was lucky. That's it. I don't work night security anymore. I also don't stay in cabins or lodges with big uncovered windows. People make fun of me for that, but I don't care. They haven't stood in a lit room and watched a face appear out of black glass. Now, if I'm somewhere remote at night, I check the doors first. Then, the windows. Then I turn off the inside lights before I look outside. Because I don't think the dark is the scariest part anymore. The scariest part is being the only thing in it that can clearly be seen. Well, that wraps up these 4 creepy, true, scary stories from isolated mansions. If you made it all the way to the end, let me know in the comments which story got under your skin the most. I read every single one of them. I'm always looking for real-life horror encounters to share here on Nightmare Reads, especially stories involving isolated houses, old mansions, cabins, or late-night encounters that still don't feel right. If you enjoyed this compilation, leave a like and subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, trust your gut, and keep your doors locked.